In Netflix, the second content language category after English is Korean, not Spanish, not Hindi, it's Korean.
I am very pleased and excited to be here as your moderator. We're going to be talking about movies and dramas. We're seeing a significant decline in the cinema industry with a declining attendance and ticket sales. So tell me, how bleak is the picture right now?
If you look back at 2019, that was the apex, the peak of Korean cinema. Right? That was a year we did $1.5 billion in box office. Out of the top 10 biggest hit shows in Korea, we had 6 US shows that were franchise films: Avengers Endgame, Aladdin, Frozen 2, Spider-Man, etc., etc. But the highest grossing film was a Korean local film, which was 극한 직업, right? But apart from that, we had obviously Parasite, we had 백두산, right? But out of the top 10 movies, 4 were Korean local movies. And the big discrepancy is the budgets. I mean, compare Avengers and Endgame with Parasite. It's a couple zeros of a difference in terms of budgets, right? But that was our peak year. And it was phenomenal. And I think, why are we in this situation today? I think from then on, we hit COVID. I think we got a little bit confused about the market and the distribution. Korean dramas, it's a bit different. There's a channel, there's a fandom. Korean movies have always been very festival-driven. But I think I was a CJ at that time, and our confusion was, let's now be much more aggressive. And I think what we found out now in 2025 is that apart from the systematic problems that the industry has worldwide, every country has a problem with the movie theaters right now in that business. But in Korea, we're only 50 million people, and actually the people who can actually go to the cinemas, maybe 20 million. But the budgets have gone tremendously high. We're taking much higher risks. And in a market where now dollars, moviegoers are going down, it's hit Korea in a much more strong way now. And this is not to say that we're not creating good movies. It's just to say, are we being fiscally prudent with the budgets to make those movies that are global and those movies that should be small? But not everything needs to be big. And I think there's a little bit of confusion in the market from that standpoint.
So the downturn itself is universal due to like a shift towards streaming services and a change in our viewing habits. But it seems like the Korean market seems to be affected even more, and it's prominent in Korea, and it's because of the smaller market size, are you saying?
I would say a couple of things. Smaller market size, we are very connected online. When I was at Warner Brothers, we're the first company to reduce the window from theatrical to TVOD to 21 days, which means you only had 3 weeks in theatrical to make box office.
It's become even shorter these days.
It's become shorter and shorter. There's a risk aversion. And even in the US, we see movies that start slow and you give it time and then they become global hits. We don't have that patience here in Korea. We all have big screens at home. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we'd wait 3 months before we got to a screen next to us. The reason to go to a movie to watch a movie is less compelling now, especially in a country like Korea, where we're online every day, we're looking for short-form content.
And while the movies are on the cinema, we watch like YouTube trailers and interviews or even like review shows.
The summaries.
Some say that the Korean film industry is having a crisis right now. Do you concur to this idea? Are we too sensitive to crisis?
I think, as with any business, you have to look at the supply and the demand. And I think film history, getting 10 million admissions was the holy grail in Korea. But those were movies that were $7 million, $8 million, right? And you wanted to get 10 million admissions in Korea. That was the 목표, right? After Parasite, we're making movies at $40 million, $50 million. That 10 million admissions is now to break even, right? So when you look at it from that perspective, it doesn't make any sense. You have to have a quarter of the population of Korea come watch the movie to break even. So when you think about the economics of financing and making movies, you really have to understand that it has to work locally first. And for something like a Hollywood movie, there is the infrastructure to go global. But for Korean movies, there's no distribution. It's getting better after Parasite. There are a couple of companies, Neon, etc., that are buying Korean movies, but they're not buying 100 movies a year. They're being very selective. And when everyone here is making 100 movies to try to sell international, it's not going to sell. So then you need to make the decision, can we go big with budgets, or should we keep on targeting first our local market?
But because of the rise of the streaming platforms or YouTube, the films are losing chances to be released or to be even made. Is it safe to say that this trend is opening up new opportunities for the Korean drama series?
I mean, for sure. It's thanks to Netflix that Korean dramas are known globally. But I think the one thing we understand now, you ask anyone in Korea, we're in a crisis as well with Korean dramas. But I think it's a bit different than the existential crisis that the cinema industry has, that the film industry has. I think ours was more, you go abroad and you talk to anyone about TV content, and everyone is so excited about Korean content. In terms of in Netflix, the second content language category after English is Korean, not Spanish, not Hindi, it's Korean. And we have 40 million speakers here, right? And Spanish is 1 billion speakers, right? And so everyone's excited. You talk to, Ted Sarandos at Netflix, Bob Iger at Disney, they're like, we need to invest more in the Korean market, outside, especially in case studies like the Korean market.
And that includes not just unscripted, but also scripted.
Unscripted, right?
Yeah.
But then you talk to anyone in Korea, production companies, studios, channels, and they're like, we are done. There's no future. And you're like, where's the discrepancy?
Yeah.
Like, what's happening? And I think there are obviously problems with how we're creating content, the expectations, and that has to do with the rapid growth and expansion of Korean dramas, right? If you all remember, before 2011, we had three national broadcasters that did all the dramas. 2011, we had cable companies come in, JTBC, TVN, that really ramped up the competition in Korean dramas in general. And eventually Netflix came in. So if you look at 2023, you had three national broadcasters. You had TVN, JTBC, you had ENA, and then you had 3 or 4 global platforms, Netflix, Amazon, Disney, and Apple, all coming in here. The producers, we got confused. We're like, all right, well, let's make as much as possible, and one of them will be Squid Game. But the biggest confusion is that I was a studio dragon, and we'd get pitched ideas all the time, and they'd be like, this is a global show. And I ran global at Studio Dragon, and I'd be like, no, this is just very expensive. It's a Korean show that's very expensive. It's not global, right? And I think people mistake budgets with actual things that can work outside of Korea. Right? And the example we give with Squid Game is that you watch Squid Game, and initially in Korea it didn't do that well. It did better outside of Korea. Similar with Parasite. But if you look at the pilot episode, the first episode of Squid Game, it's an American-style pilot. It introduces the universe. It talks about the characters. There's a turning point, an inciting incident. And then you can tell after the end of the first pilot what character and what journey they're going to go through. That's an American pilot. And we do a lot of Korean dramas, and you don't get that until episode 4, after 5 hours of content. And that's very hard to absorb if you're used to American content, right? This to say that we just grew very fast, and maybe not with the rigor to quality and budgeting that TV requires. Because movies is a lottery. It's like going to Las Vegas. You can make a lot of money or lose it all. With dramas, it's small margins, right? And you usually don't go into production until you have sold something, right? So the risk is less, but we forgot about all that. It's not that we have a creative crisis, we have a business crisis. And right now, the only buyer is Netflix, because all the platforms are having troubles in the US. They will come back, but right now, that's why the industry in the TV drama space seems so dire, but it's not unsolvable.
And speaking of the risks in the business aspect, some raise concerns about the ever-rising production cost of the Korean dramas. That includes the astronomical guarantees for lead actors and actresses. To put this into context, the production cost of the Japanese dramas almost remained the same over the past decade, but that of the Korean dramas has tripled or sometimes quadrupled. Why is the difference between the two neighboring countries?
That's a great question. And we were watching a panel yesterday with head of production of Wow, one of the biggest cable channels in Japan. And part of that panel was, what's Korean doing so well compared to Japan? And I was watching that, I was thinking, well, they're doing things also better than us. So I think 6-7 years ago, the cost per episode of a Korean drama was around 5억, 6억, right? So around $400,000-$500,000, which is up to par with Japan. And I would say that was reasonable at that time, 6-7 years ago, when the industry for Korean dramas was Southeast Asia, Japan, and Korea. As our dramas start doing better and finding different audiences in the US, in Western Europe, and Latin America, budgets of course go up because our content became more global. So the difference between Japan and Korea is that our broadcast licensing for our first run Korean broadcaster will cover maybe 30%, 40% of the production budget. The rest we have to get from sales, international sales. Japan doesn't sell internationally. They cover 110% locally because they don't need to export. Their market is big enough for that. So for the past 6-7 years, since they haven't exported, their budgets have maintained very similar for the past 10 years. We've gone from $500,000 to $2 million per episode. I would say that there are certain shows that, yes, you should pay $2 million per episode for a Korean show if it has a global audience. But you go back to casting, like a romantic comedy should never be that expensive. But what's driving the budgets up is the casting fees, because we have limited actors, and this idea that unless you cast well in a Korean drama, you're not going to sell it and nobody's going to watch it. And that's, you have the same 10 people that everyone goes after. And even though it's a romantic comedy that has everything's done on set, something that used to cost $400 now costs $2 million just because of casting. And that's something that the Japanese market has leveled out and hasn't increased, right? They have room for growth. I think we need to do a serious analysis of, if we're gonna make Squid Game, yes, we should spend $5 million per episode because that's a global show. But if you're gonna do something smaller market, then we need to have more rigor in the budgeting.
Well, compared to the Japanese ones, why are we seeing a distinct increase in the Korean dramas hitting the global OTT services? Well, it's of course because of the compelling narrative, but is it at the same time because of maybe something in the topics, or is it because of the setting that is so foreign and exotic to the outside viewers? I want to go back to your first experience exporting Korean content to the Latin American countries. When was it, and how did they receive Korean content? It must have been viewed in a very, remarkable way.
It was a long time ago. So my brother and I started this company called Drama Fever in 2008, which is when Netflix went streaming. And we just copied the model for Korean dramas, and we subtitled everything into Spanish, Portuguese, and English, and showed it to the North American and South American audience. In 2008, there was a market for Korean dramas, but they were all illegal websites. So illegally downloaded episodes, very badly subtitled and with viruses, right? So we created this streaming platform for Korean content because we knew they were doing very well in Asia, and we knew there was no legal way to watch them professionally in the US and Latin America. And what we noticed is that we had this huge increase of viewership in Latin America between teenagers and then Midwest American white women. We did a lot of surveys, and the ideas were, well, the universal themes of family and the Cinderella stories, the romantic comedies, that works everywhere. And Hollywood is very bad at that. They don't believe in romantic comedies or romance. I don't know why, in movies especially, right? Or series, right? But we are so good at that. So here come Korean dramas about Cinderella stories, and you only watch 16 hours and you get a happy ending. Like, everyone was excited about that. And more importantly, I worked a lot in places like Colombia, Venezuela, Argentina, where there was a lot of telenovelas about narcs, about drugs, about Pablo Escobar. That was an exciting thing. And you'd see teenage girls saying, well, every woman actress or character here is a prostitute or a drug dealer. Like, it doesn't make any, I don't see myself reflected here. Nothing aspirational. And here comes a romantic drama with Lee Min-ho and Park Shin-hye, 산석자들, and the heirs. And I was like, yes, I want to marry that chaebol guy, right? I want to marry that rich guy. So it's aspirational. And I think there's definitely a fandom around romantic comedies and romance. Our writers in Korea don't want to do that anymore. They're like, it's too childish. But there's a certain sector around the world that loves that content. Southeast Asia, Japan, Latin America, Midwestern women, mothers in Kansas. Because they would say, this is content I can watch with my whole family, and nothing else in American TV can
without
watch with my
being
family.
embarrassed.
Or too much sex or too much blood. But then what Netflix has shown is that we do dark stuff really well as well in Korea. So we can do both of them, right? And that's the beauty of Korean creators. We can do it all. It's a matter of being responsible with the budgets, right?
And you also mentioned that in Hollywood, you're supposed to hand in one pilot episode, whereas in Korea, you're supposed to write 4 episodes. Is that true?
Yes. So writer contracts are different in Korea. You do long-term, with the big writers in Korea, especially in television, you do 100-hour contracts. Kim Woo-suk 작가 from The Glory, she had a 100-hour contract. Park Jin 작가 had a 100-hour contract with Studio Dragon. When that happens, they just need to tick off hours of their contract to finish the contract. In the US, when we did our first show, as Greg is saying, it's very pilot-driven. There are times if you're using a writer who's not top level, you don't have to pay the writer to come with a take. There's this thing called IFCOM, which I learned, and I use it all the time now because it's free. So you negotiate with a writer, you bring a piece of IP and you tell the writer, hey, I want to do this. Let's try to sell this to Apple. So the writer comes back and does a 기획안, a treatment, and you pitch it. But the trick is that they do it for free. But if it gets sold, then the terms are already negotiated. So it's very fast, right? But what it does is it doesn't waste anyone's time, right? Because when you get 4 episodes, and that's how you pitch a show, if you don't like the first episode, why read the next 3? But that's 8 months of work of a writer. So that's nothing efficient. But when we talk about global projects, about how to make Korean shows a little bit more global, our writers need help in getting their minds outside of I need 4 episodes to start the story. It's like, no. You have 45 minutes to start a story. And we've tried to do this with our local writers, and they don't know how to do this. And here comes someone like Greg. That's his job, right? He runs a script accelerator. He helps break story, right? And I think it's gonna be fun to have a Korean writer who will have her creative process, who will have her standard, and will say, why do we have to do this? I want to write 4 episodes, and it's like, no, well, focus on one. It's like, well, I don't know how to do that. And with companies like Greg's, can we collaborate on educating or changing the perspective of our own Korean writers to do something that sounds or feels and looks a little bit more global, although it's in Korean?